Many attended the commemoration ceremony of the 193rd anniversary of the 1823 Demerara Revolt. The ceremony was filled with cultural items, including a dance by the National School of Dance and a melodious rendition of national song. The short ceremony was attended by government ministers, Speaker of the National Assembly, Dr. Burton Scotland, and other officials. The site of the seawall monument, which was commissioned in August of 2013, was strongly contested by prominent African groups who had favored parade ground as the most suitable location for a monument. The Demerara Revolt is remembered in the village of Bachelor's Adventure, where the massacre occurred. In this village, a memorial to remember the Demerara martyrs was built by residents. On Saturday morning, President David Granger, during his address, said the government will erect a memorial at Independence Park or parade ground to commemorate the execution during the 1823 revolt.
But the government will erect a memorial at Independence Park. The government will erect a memorial at Independence Park to commemorate these executions. Future generations must not forget that freedom was bought at a high price, the price of martyrdom of hundreds of Africans on the 20th of August, 1823.
It was a request African leaders had made to the former PPC government, but they refused to lend a listening ear and build a monument at the seawall instead. However, President Granger has listened. According to the head of state, this atrocity is perhaps the single most significant event that hastened the abolition of slavery in the British colonies during that time. He noted that the Demerara Revolt was the turning point in slave society and is commemorated as one of the most important events in Guyanese and Caribbean history.
The revolt's historical role in the passage of the Emancipation Act by the British Parliament in 1833, a decade later, is undisputed. The Demerara Revolt broke out on Monday the 18th of August 1823. Brigadier General John Murray, the governor, proclaimed martial law the next day and mobilized a formidable military force. The massacre took place at Plantation Bachelor's Adventure, where over 2,000 rebels confronted the main body of troops under Lieutenant Colonel John Thomas Leahy. The martial law proclamation was read, and after some talk, the troops were ordered to attack. One account stated, and I quote, "The soldiers poured in volley after volley. The slaves returned fire but soon began to run, leaping the trenches into which many tumbled lifeless. Many were shot down on the road and in the cotton fields. By noon, the roadside was littered with dead bodies. About 200 slaves had been killed."
President Granger also noted that retribution was swift and severe. History records that Colonel Leahy and his officers had held summary drumhead trials, each lasting only a few minutes. The courts reached hasty verdicts based on hearsay evidence. The accused invariably were found guilty, tied to trees, and shot immediately. Their corpses were laid side by side on the ground. Heads were then decapitated and placed on poles along public roads in front of the plantations. President Granger said,
"Triumphant, the troops moved from plantation to plantation, pursuing fugitives and releasing the planters, who, for the most part, were unharmed. They had been placed in stocks to prevent them from obstructing the freedom which the Africans believed that King George had granted them. Expeditions scoured the backlands in search of fugitive rebels, particularly the assumed ringleader Kwamina. A mercenary found him and shot him dead on the 16th of September. His body was carried back and hung in chains outside Plantation Success on the East Coast. The planters and populace were exultant, but the very excesses for which the planters congratulated themselves in Georgetown were condemned in London."
The Emancipation Act was passed a decade after 1824. Because of this horrific incident, President David Granger emphasized the need for Guyanese to remember the price paid for freedom by their ancestors, the Africans. George?